I was 16 when my parents stopped calling me by my name. To them, I became the help. My mother would shout from her recliner, "Bring me my coffee, Maid." My father would toss his laundry at my feet like I was invisible. While my friends went to parties and dreamed about college, I was scrubbing floors, cooking dinner, and raising my little brother because my parents were too tired from life. When I turned 18, they told me I wasn't going to college. "Someone has to stay and take care of us," my mother sneered. I smiled, nodded, and kept cleaning. But I had a plan, one that would take years to perfect. When the state finally showed up to take care of them, I made sure they understood what it felt like to be treated as dependents. Justice, I learned, doesn't always come fast. But when it does, it's cold, bureaucratic, and devastatingly poetic. I used to think every family had rules like ours. That daughters were supposed to serve, that silence was respect, and that exhaustion was love. In our house, the hierarchy was carved in stone. My father ruled, my mother commanded, my brother was the golden heir, and I was the help. Every morning began the same. The smell of burnt coffee, my father barking from the living room, and the sound of my mother's voice, sharp and expectant. "Layla, the laundry isn't done. What do you even do all day?" What I did was everything. I washed, cooked, cleaned, and took care of my brother while she spent her days watching TV dramas about perfect mothers who never lifted a finger. When my classmates asked why I was always tired, I lied. I said we were a close family who helped each other. The truth was, there was no each other. There was only them, and then there was me, invisible, replaceable, necessary. My father worked part-time at an auto shop but treated it like a crown. Every paycheck was his proof of superiority. "I put the food on the table," he'd say while I cooked that food, served it, and cleaned it up. He'd glance at me only when something was wrong. "You missed a spot," or, "You call this dinner?" I learned early that anger got me nowhere. Resistance only meant punishment, silence, cold stares, and sometimes no dinner at all. So I stopped fighting. I became efficient, obedient, mechanical. My hands moved like they didn't belong to me. My voice became careful, thin, and polite. Still, there were moments when the mask slipped. Once, when I was 14, I came home from school to find my mother crying over bills. I offered to help her make a budget. She laughed, eyes red and mean. "You think you're smarter than me? You think you can fix this family?" I didn't answer. I just folded the laundry one shirt at a time like penance. That night, lying in bed, I realized something terrifying. I was already raising my parents. They depended on me to function. Without me, the house would collapse. That's when the fear started to twist into something else. A cold, quiet clarity. I began to notice everything. The way my mother lied on forms to get extra benefits. The way my father hid cash to avoid paying taxes. How both of them claimed they were too sick to work full-time while drinking and smoking late into the night. They were parasites dressed as victims. And I was their host. But hosts can choose to withdraw. The thought didn't feel like rebellion. It felt like survival. And for the first time in years, I went to sleep with a smile. Small, secret, and dangerous. The guidance counselor smelled like peppermint tea and laminated hope. She slid the college brochures across her desk the way priests slide candles across altars. Gentle, reverent, a ceremony of possibility. "Your grades are more than enough, Layla," she said. "Your essay draft? It's luminous." I swallowed the word like a pill I wasn't allowed to keep. Luminous. I wanted to fold it into my pocket, take it home, show it to someone who wouldn't laugh. At dinner that night, I tried to be careful. I timed it with the clink of plates, the steam rising off the rice. "I got invited to apply early decision," I said, voice steady. "They have scholarships. Full ones." My mother didn't look up. "Pass the salt, Maid." My father snorted. "Scholarships are for people with sob stories." I almost laughed. We were a museum of sob stories. We collected them like coins we refused to spend. I could commute. I tried. I could still help. Help. My mother's head snapped up. "When do you plan to help if you're playing college girl? Who's going to take your brother to school? Who's going to clean?" "He's 15, I said. "And you're 18, my father shot back, pointing with his fork. "A grown woman. In our culture, grown women know family comes first." What he meant was, you come last. They didn't argue much because they didn't have to. They declared. They carved the verdict in the air and watched me swallow it. The next morning, my mother accidentally tossed the brochures with the recycling. I found them later, wedged between an empty detergent box and a pizza flyer, edges curled and damp. I smoothed them under my mattress like contraband. I started sneaking to the school library before first period, using the ancient computers to fill out applications while the janitor whistled down the hall. I checked the box for fee waiver, with a mix of hope and guilt, and typed the essay my counselor called luminous in a hurry, praying the screen wouldn't freeze. I used the school's address for contact mail. It felt like a crime that came with its own fight song. At home, my mother began a new ritual. She would stand behind me while I washed dishes, her voice floating over the soap suds. You know what college is? It's where children go to learn how to disrespect their parents. I won't. You already are. She cooled her cigarette in the sink. Dreams are expensive. Gratitude is free. I took a job at a bakery after school and on weekends. The manager liked me because I could carry 3 racks at once and smile through the ache. By the end of the first week, my back ached in a neat, precise line, like a ruler pressed into my spine. The first paycheck came folded like a secret, and I pressed my thumb along the seam, thinking of application fees, bus passes, maybe a used laptop if I found a miracle. My father opened it before I could. Rent, he said, shaking the paper like it had misbehaved. You live here. Adults pay. It's $142, I said. It won't cover. It'll cover your attitude. He slid the stub back as if that made it mine. I started to track things quiet and invisible. The mornings when my mother claimed migraine but the wine bottles in the recycling told a different story. The afternoons when my father worked late, yet his boots came home clean and his knuckles smelled like card games and cheap whiskey. I wasn't ready to fight. I was only learning to remember. When the email arrived, we're thrilled to offer you a place pending financial aid review. I printed it at school and felt my hands shake. I pictured telling my parents at the right moment not to beg but to announce. I imagined bringing them proof that I could leave and still be good. That fantasy lasted 6 hours. The next day my mother greeted me with a smile that showed every tooth. They called, she said. Who? The school. Something about papers. She tapped the table with a pen. They said parents' signatures would be needed for aid. I looked at the landline, that dinosaur we kept for debt collectors. What did you say? She leaned back, satisfied. I told them no. I told them we can't support this indulgence. I didn't need you to support anything, I said softly. Just to sign. That's support. I tried to explain that I could file as independent next year if I had proof of something. Neglect. Homelessness. Abuse. The words felt like matches I wasn't brave enough to strike. My father laughed, big and wet. Independent? Under our roof? Then let me go, I whispered. My mother's voice softened into the kind of honey that drowns bees. Why are you so eager to abandon family? Don't you love us? There was the trick hook. I tasted blood and stayed quiet. The next weeks turned tactical. I met with the counselor in a small office with posters of mountains that said things like aim high. He handed me forms and numbers like lifelines. There are pathways, she said. If your parents won't cooperate, we can look at options for next year. You'll need documentation. Documentation. Paper is power. He smiled, tired and kind. I wish it wasn't. But it is. At home, my parents began what they called planning. It sounded like this. You'll increase your hours at the bakery, my father decreed. Then you'll look for night shifts, caregiving, cleaning. Women make good money doing what they do naturally. My mother nodded. We'll save for a car. For the family. The family meant them. The car meant more errands. My life was a pie they divided without asking what flavor I wanted to be. The night before graduation, I ironed my gown in the kitchen while my mother flipped channels and rolled her eyes. Make sure you smile, she said. People will be watching. For you. For us, she corrected. Everything you are reflects on us. I thought about a mirror held too close. Every flaw multiplies. At the ceremony, my name was read with the small, polite applause reserved for girls who don't bring a crowd. My counselor hugged me, and for a second my body remembered what warmth felt like without a price tag. My parents sat stiff and unimpressed. On the way home, my father said, "Congratulations. Childhood's over." It had been over for years. 2 weeks later, I found a sealed letter in the mailbox with the college's crest. The envelope felt heavy. I turned it over, saw the flaps sliced and resealed with Scotch tape. Inside was the financial aid package. Generous, miraculous, and a note. Asterisk, we still require parental verification for this year. Without it, we can defer your admission. Sis. My mother watched me read. Don't say I never do anything for you, she chirped. I put it back exactly how it was. You opened my mail. I opened our mail. She smoothed the envelope like petting a cat backward. Family has no secrets. That night, the bakery's leftover loaves sat in a paper bag by my bed, yeasty and warm. I stared at the ceiling and counted the cracks. I tried to imagine one more year of this. Then I imagined two. I pictured my 20s eaten by errands, my 30s calcified by resentment, my 40s empty as a cleaned plate. The future shrank to a point. So I made a small, treasonous decision. I would not tell them when I deferred. I would not explain the forms I started collecting, the policies I began reading until my eyes blurred. I would work and save and keep the paper trail neat. If they needed me to be their maid, fine. I would learn every corridor of the house. I would know where the wiring ran, where the pipes groaned, where the foundation cracked. Because a house is easiest to collapse from the inside. And I was already there, quiet, patient, luminous enough to see in the dark. It started with a knock. Not the kind that demands, but the kind that asks. 3 soft taps at the door on a Tuesday morning when the house still smelled like cigarette smoke and reheated rice. I opened it to find a woman holding a clipboard and a smile that had seen too much. Hi, I'm Marjorie from Family Services, she said, her voice steady and professional. We've had some reports about possible truancy issues for your brother. Are your parents home? I froze. My parents were still asleep, both pretending to be sick, to avoid another day of responsibility. My brother had skipped school for a week, claiming stomach pain. The truth? He'd discovered video games and realized no one would stop him. They're resting, I said. But I can help. She raised an eyebrow. You're the sister, right, Layla? The way she said my name, softly like it belonged to me, startled me. I nodded. Marjorie took a look around the living room. The overflowing ashtray, the stacks of unopened mail, the mildew creeping up the curtain edges. I braced for judgment, but her expression was professional, neutral. I'm just here to check on attendance and make sure everything's okay at home, she said, jotting something down. You seem pretty responsible for your age. That word responsible cut sharper than any insult. I wasn't responsible, I was trapped. But she didn't know that. No one did. I'll let my parents know you came, I said quickly. She smiled again, but her eyes lingered. If you ever need to talk, Layla, sometimes it helps just to know your options. He handed me a card. It read, Marjorie Lee, Child and Family Services, confidential support. Sis. I tucked it into my sleeve before my parents woke up. That night, my mother exploded. You embarrassed us, she yelled. Some stranger coming to our door asking questions. What did you say to her? Nothing, I said, hands trembling. She was here about my brother. She was here because you talked too much at school. My mother slammed a mug into the sink. Always playing the victim. Always pretending you're some little martyr. I wanted to scream that I was the only reason this house hadn't collapsed, that without me the fridge would be empty and the bills unpaid. But instead I just nodded. Silence was armor. Later, when they were asleep, I pulled Marjorie's card from under my pillow. I didn't call her. Not yet. But I started reading laws, policies, everything I could find on dependency, adult care, and guardianship. I learned how the state decides who's capable and who isn't. I learned that adults who refuse treatment or show patterns of negligence can be classified as dependent adults, the same way children can be classified as minors in need of care. It was a bureaucracy of justice. Slow, cold, and completely impersonal. And it fascinated me. In school, while my classmates flirted or scrolled through their phones, I sat in the library studying public assistance regulations. I memorized terms like representative payee and protective supervision. I learned how people like Marjorie didn't ruin lives. They documented the ruin that was already there. By the time my brother turned 16, he started skipping school permanently. My parents laughed it off. He's smart like his father, my mother said, ruffling his hair. He'll get by. I looked at the growing pile of unopened letters from his school district and said nothing. The next year, I moved out under the pretense of getting a better job. They didn't protest much. They assumed I'd send money. I didn't tell them the truth. I'd found a roommate and a quiet corner in a public records office. I was hired as a file clerk, alphabetizing the very kind of documents I'd been studying in secret. For the first time, I had my own key, my own air. From my desk, I began to see how the system really worked. How families were evaluated, how dependency was assigned, how control could shift from one set of hands to another with the right forms and timing. It wasn't dramatic. It was methodical. And one day, as I filed a case labeled Adult Protective Services Intake, Neglect and Self-Abuse, something clicked. The report described a couple in their 50s. Poor hygiene, substance abuse, refusal to work, relying on their teenage daughter for support. I felt my pulse quicken. I could have written it myself. That's when it hit me. I didn't need to escape my parents anymore. I needed to define them. Because the system had words for people like them. And once those words were written in ink, they weren't parents anymore. They were dependents. And I, the forgotten maid, would one day be listed as their contact of record. Not their daughter. Not their victim. Just a name on a form. The person authorized to decide what happens next. When I moved out, my parents celebrated like it was their idea. My mother even hugged me at the door, her perfume a mix of fake roses and cigarette smoke. "Don't forget where you came from," she said, her voice sticky sweet. "Family always comes first." I smiled. "Of course, Mom." Inside, I was already gone. I got a small apartment on the outskirts of town. A one-bedroom with peeling paint and the kind of quiet that hums. I didn't have much. A futon, a thrift store lamp, and a lock that only I had the key to. Freedom doesn't always come with luxury. Sometimes it's just the right to close a door and have no one call your name. But freedom required strategy. My revenge couldn't look like revenge. It had to look like devotion. So I called my parents every Sunday. I used the same tone they taught me, submissive, polite, always a hint of guilt. "How are you, Mama? Do you need groceries?" "We're fine," she'd say. "But if you want to help, you can send some cash." I'd send exactly $50. Enough to keep me in their good books, not enough to make them comfortable. I learned that manipulation wasn't just their language. It was a currency. And I was fluent now. Over time, their lives began to unravel quietly. My brother dropped out of school completely, spent his days gaming and his nights wandering. My father's back injury got worse. Conveniently worse whenever job applications came around. My mother began collecting prescriptions she didn't need, selling them to neighbors. Every time I visited, I took mental snapshots. Piles of unopened mail, rotting food, my mother's shaking hands, my father's slurred speech. I didn't interfere. I just noticed. I'd ask gentle questions, the kind that left trails. "Mom, have you been taking your meds?" "Of course," she'd say defensively, fumbling with bottles. "Dad, are you still getting those checks from the disability office?" "Why do you care?" He'd bark, eyes narrow. That's what I wanted, resistance. It made them dig deeper into their lies. Meanwhile, I kept records. Dates, times, photos, voice memos. It started as self-protection, but it evolved into something cleaner. Evidence. I didn't just want revenge. I wanted documentation. I wasn't ready to report them yet. Not until the story wrote itself. Then came the perfect storm. One night, my father called me, his voice panicked. "Layla, your mother fell." "I rushed over." She was sitting on the couch, a towel pressed to her forehead, blood soaking through the fabric. "She slipped," my father muttered, eyes glassy. I told her to get up slower. I noticed the whiskey bottle on the table, the untouched dinner on the stove, the way she avoided my eyes. She wasn't hurt from slipping. She was hurt from falling apart. "Do you want me to take you to the hospital?" I asked. She shook her head violently. "No hospitals. No records." That phrase, "no records," echoed. It wasn't fear of doctors. It was fear of exposure. So I pretended to understand. I cleaned the wound, wrapped her head gently, and said, "You should be more careful. If someone saw you like this, they might think you're not managing well." She froze. "What do you mean?" "Nothing," I said lightly. "Just, people make judgments. You know how it is." The seed was planted. Over the next few months, I visited more often. I offered to organize their bills, update their insurance, handle mail. They resisted at first, They didn't want me to see the mess. But dependency is a slow addiction. Soon they couldn't function without my help. Then one afternoon my father asked the question I'd been waiting for. Could you handle some of this official stuff for us? The forms, the payments? You're good with that bureaucracy crap. I smiled. Of course, Dad. I'd be happy to help. He handed me power without realizing it. A small stack of documents that included his disability records, my mother's prescription statements, and their signed consent to act on their behalf for administrative matters. Just like that, I wasn't their maid anymore. I was their asterisk representative. Over the next 6 months, I made subtle changes. Updated their contact info to my address, ensured all communication from social services went through me, and filed routine welfare reviews, carefully, honestly, with every ugly detail intact. When the investigator called me for clarification, I didn't dramatize. I just told the truth, their version of it. The lies they'd told, the fraud they'd hinted at, the dependency they'd nurtured like a religion. Thank you for your cooperation, the woman said. We'll handle it from here. And that's when I realized, revenge didn't have to be loud. It could be written in ink, sealed in envelopes, and stamped by the government. All I had to do was keep playing the perfect daughter, until the system saw what I already knew. It's funny how freedom starts to smell like paper. Forms, envelopes, letters. Those were my weapons now. While my parents thought I was helping them, I was really building a legal labyrinth they'd never escape from. Every signature they gave me was another thread in the web. By the time my 22nd birthday arrived, I had everything I needed. Not revenge, not yet, but structure. My parents' entire lives existed on my laptop. Scanned bills, unpaid rent notices, prescription reports, and records of every time they lied to the state. I was no longer just their daughter. I was their archivist. They didn't suspect a thing. Why would they? I'd perfected the performance of obedience. Layla, did you bring groceries? Of course, Mom. Can you fix the computer again? Sure, Dad. They didn't see how I always left a little earlier than they expected, how I asked to take old mail to organize it, or how I smiled when they complained about the government trying to control people. Inside, I was already planning how to let the government asterisk control them. The first step was distance. Emotional, then physical. I told them I'd been offered a new job 2 hours away with better pay. My mother frowned. You can't just leave us here, she said. I'll visit every weekend, I lied. I'll handle everything remotely. They agreed, reluctantly, because I had become indispensable. They couldn't handle the paperwork, the bills, or even basic forms without me. I was their connection to the outside world. And that's what made it so easy. Once I moved, I changed my number, claiming network issues. I rerouted their mail to a post office box and opened an online account for their benefits. Slowly, I began reporting things exactly as they were. Recipients have limited hygiene and mobility. Recipients display consistent confusion and noncompliance. Household appears unsafe due to substance misuse and hoarding. Each report was factual. I didn't lie. I didn't have to. The bureaucracy worked like clockwork. Within months, a state caseworker was assigned to review their living conditions. I was notified first, as their authorized representative. When I read the email, my hands shook. Not from fear, but from something deeper. The kind of satisfaction that hums low and cold like a machine warming up. The caseworker's visit was scheduled for a Thursday morning. I didn't go. I let the system walk right into that house, let it smell the decay, hear my father's drunken yelling, see the empty pill bottles and unpaid bills. That afternoon my phone buzzed. It was my mother, hysterical. They're saying we can't manage ourselves. That they might assign some program. I'm sure it's just a routine check, I said calmly. Be honest with them, Mom. They're here to help. Help, she spat. They're trying to take control of our money. I stayed silent. She didn't realize she was quoting me from years ago. A week later the decision came. Due to evidence of sustained neglect, self-endangerment, and financial incapacity, both my parents were officially classified as asterisk dependent adults under state supervision. Asterisk their benefits were transferred to a fiduciary office. One that, ironically, required my confirmation as emergency contact. They were furious but helpless. Their appeals went nowhere because the documentation was airtight. Every form bore their own signatures. Every detail matched the records I'd submitted. When my father called me, his voice was shaking with rage. You did this. Dad, I said softly, you're the one who asked me to handle the paperwork. You're supposed to be our daughter. I said, until you made me your maid. There was silence. Then a sound I'd never heard from him, a small, broken laugh. You've become just like them, he said. Cold. Heartless. No. Irreplié. I just learned their language. After that, I stopped answering his calls. My brother texted once, begging me to fix it. I told him to grow up, to get a job, to stop waiting for someone else to clean up his mess. He never replied. By the time winter came, I'd filed for a new address, a new job, and a new number. I didn't tell anyone where I was going. I didn't have to. Because the truth was simple. I didn't need revenge anymore. I'd built something better. A system of justice so slow, so precise, so official, that it would outlast all of us. They wanted a servant. I became their guardian. They wanted control. I gave them supervision. And for the first time I finally slept soundly because the state never sleeps. The first sign that the system had truly taken over came in the form of a letter. Not to me but to them. Notice of Supervision Review. It read, printed in sterile black ink. My father called, his voice trembling. They're sending someone again, he said. We already talked to them. That's how it works, Dad, I replied, feigning sympathy. They just want to make sure you're safe. He cursed under his breath. My mother grabbed the phone next. Safe? They're acting like we're crazy. I let her rant, her voice echoing through the receiver. When she finally stopped, I said gently, you should cooperate. Otherwise they might decide you need full-time assistance. That word, assistance made her gasp. You mean, like a home? I didn't answer. I didn't need to. From that day the calls multiplied. Sometimes they begged. Sometimes they threatened. Once my father left a voicemail, his voice slurred and hoarse. You think this makes you powerful? You think you won? Wait until they treat you like they're treating us. I listened to it twice, then deleted it. The irony didn't escape me. He'd spent years treating me like property, and now he was outraged to be treated like paperwork. The state moved slowly as it always does, but it moved. The inspections became regular. The case reports grew thicker. Each one carried phrases like non-compliance, declining hygiene, and increased dependency. The house that once felt like my prison was now a documented hazard. By spring, my father's disability payments were reallocated to a managed account. My mother's prescriptions were monitored by a visiting nurse. The nurse called me once, asking for verification of their emergency contacts. Yes, I said, I'm their only contact. The nurse hesitated. You're a very devoted daughter. I smiled into the silence. They taught me well. The control they had once exercised, over me, over everything, was collapsing in on them. It didn't happen in one dramatic moment, but through 1,000 small indignities. Their debit card stopped working. Their internet was cut off. Social services decided they weren't capable of managing utilities independently. They became subjects of the very bureaucracy they used to mock. When I finally visited months later, the house had changed. The air smelled like disinfectant and loneliness. A care worker greeted me at the door. They're inside, she said kindly. It's good you came. My father sat in his recliner, unshaven and smaller than I remembered. My mother was by the window staring at nothing. When she saw me, her eyes lit up, not with love but with desperation. Layla, she whispered, please, fix this. Tell them we're fine. We don't need help. I crouched beside her, my voice soft. You do need help, Mom. You just didn't want it from me. Her hand clutched mine, thin and shaking. You don't understand. They tell us when to eat, when to take pills. They check the trash, for God's sake. I met her eyes. You remember when I was 16 and you made me scrub your dishes until midnight? When you told me I'd never survive on my own. You taught me obedience. The difference is, I learned how to use it. She started to cry, and my father glared at me with what was left of his pride. You think this is justice? He spat. You've just become another system that feeds on people. I stood. No, Dad. I became the system that feeds on you. That broke him. His eyes hardened, then dimmed. My mother whispered prayers under her breath, old words that once held power. Not anymore. Before I left, the care worker handed me a form. "You're still listed as their point of contact," she said. "Would you like to keep that status?" I paused. The house behind me groaned like an exhausted body. My parents' voices faded into a low hum. "Yes," I said finally. "Keep me listed." Because control isn't always about presence. Sometimes it's about ownership of silence. As I walked back to my car, I looked once at the front door. The same door where I'd once stood as their servant, hands raw from cleaning. Now it was their cage. And I was the one who held the key. The final unraveling began on a gray morning in March, when the state decided to make things official. I didn't even need to be there. I'd already seen the notice. Asterisk scheduled welfare review. Potential transfer of oversight. Asterisk the phrase was clinical, harmless on paper, but I knew what it meant. It meant the state had stopped asking whether my parents could care for themselves and had started preparing to prove that they couldn't. At 9 a.m., a white sedan pulled up in front of their crumbling house. 2 caseworkers stepped out, dressed in government beige and carrying clipboards that could rewrite destinies. The neighbors peeked through blinds, curious. My father opened the door halfway, shirt unbuttoned, eyes red. "What's this about?" he demanded. "Routine review," the woman said, her tone polished but unyielding. "We just need to verify living conditions and confirm ongoing eligibility for benefits." He tried to bluff. "We already did this. You people have too much time on your hands." But his voice wavered when the second caseworker took a photo of the kitchen sink overflowing with dishes, the stained carpet, the ashtrays scattered across the table. My mother hovered behind him, her smile brittle. "We're fine. We don't need any." "Mrs. Malik," the woman interrupted softly, "will also be conducting an assessment of your medical compliance. Could you show me where you keep your medication?" My mother's hand froze mid-gesture. She looked to my father, who glared, helpless. The state didn't shout. The state didn't threaten. The state simply documented. They asked to see the bedroom, the bathroom, the pantry. Each room told a story of denial. Mold on the walls. Empty pill bottles. Expired food. At one point, the male caseworker asked, "Do either of you have a designated caretaker or representative?" My father's jaw clenched. "Our daughter handles that," he muttered. "And she's aware of this visit?" He hesitated. She's busy. Works in the city." The woman nodded, writing quickly. "Understood. We'll make a note of that." When they left, they didn't argue. They just thanked my parents for their time and promised to follow up soon. But I got the real call later that afternoon. "Ms. Malik," the woman said. "Based on today's findings, we're recommending reassignment of care. Given your prior authorization, we'll be listing you as next of kin for notification. Is that acceptable?" "Of course," I said. The irony wasn't lost on me. For years, they'd treated me as if I were beneath them. Now their survival depended on my consent. 2 weeks later, the order came through. My parents were officially placed under state supervision with conditional welfare management. Their spending was restricted. Their mobility monitored. Every action required approval from me. When my father finally called, he didn't sound angry anymore. Just tired. "They said we can't even access our account without your signature." "That's right," I said. He sighed. "So you're our guardian now." "I'm your contact," I corrected. "The state is your guardian." He didn't speak for a long time. I almost felt pity. "Almost. I never thought you'd do this," he said quietly. "You trained me to obey," I replied. "I just learned who to obey instead." The line went dead. That night, I poured myself a glass of cheap wine and sat by the window, watching the city lights flicker like old secrets. I thought of the knock that had once terrified me, the knock of the social worker at 16, and realized how poetic it was. Back then, the knock was a warning. Now it was my weapon. When the state knocks, it doesn't shout or break down doors. It documents. It measures. It waits. And by the time it's done, no one even realizes they've already surrendered. My parents used to rule their home like tyrants. Now they lived under scheduled visits and supervision reports. Their kingdom had been reduced to a file number. Justice hadn't arrived with fury. It arrived in triplicate. Dependency doesn't look like chains. It looks like signatures. Forms. Weekly visits from people who speak softly but take notes on everything you do. Looks like my parents sitting side by side on a sagging couch, waiting for permission. The state had officially classified them as Level 2 dependents. That meant they could remain in their home for now, under constant review and supervision. Every month, a worker came by with a clipboard to check their meds, inspect the pantry, confirm they weren't hoarding or neglecting themselves. The house smelled like disinfectant and fear. They hated it, but they couldn't stop it. Every decision went through me now. When they needed groceries, the agency called me first. When my father wanted to withdraw cash, he needed my electronic signature. When my mother asked to refill her prescriptions, the nurse confirmed with me. I had become their bridge to the outside world, the very thing they'd once refused me. The first time I visited after their new status took effect, I brought flowers. My mother flinched when she saw me, as if kindness had become suspicious. My father stayed seated, hands trembling on his knees. They tell us when to take pills, my mother said quietly. They count them. I know, I said. That's standard. They say we can't manage our finances. You can't, I answered. You haven't for years. Her eyes flashed sharp for just a second. You sound like them. I learned from the best, I said, smiling without warmth. She looked at me like she wanted to argue, but the fire was gone. Years of entitlement had drained into confusion and exhaustion. I walked through the house slowly. Everything I once hated about it, the clutter, the smoke, the half-empty bottles, was still there. But now it wasn't my problem to fix. It was just evidence. The visiting nurse arrived halfway through my stay, clipboard in hand. Ms. Malik, she said politely, we're recommending an evaluation for assisted living. They've both been missing doses and the home environment's deteriorating. My mother gasped. No. We don't need that. We're fine. The nurse glanced at me. Ultimately, you're their contact. We'll need your consent to move forward. I paused, watching my parents. My father's face was red with humiliation, my mother trembling with fear. For years they had taught me that power came from control of others, of information, of the narrative. Now the narrative wasn't theirs anymore. It was mine. Yes, I said. I think that's best. The nurse nodded and made a note. My parents stared at me, betrayed but powerless. Later that night my father called. You're not taking us anywhere, he hissed. You don't get to decide that anymore, I said evenly. You think this makes you better than us? No, irraplia. It makes me free. The move happened 3 weeks later. A van came to pick them up, 2 care workers, a clipboard, a checklist. My mother cried the whole time, clutching a photo of my brother. My father shouted until his voice cracked, but no one listened. The state doesn't argue. The state just processes. They were placed in a state-funded care facility on the edge of town. Clean, efficient, monitored. They had 3 scheduled meals, supervised medication, and no access to their accounts. Everything went through me. When I visited, the staff greeted me with practiced smiles. You're such a good daughter, they said. Not many children step up like this. I nodded, offering the kind of polite smile bureaucracy loves. My parents sat together in the common room, surrounded by soft music and gray walls. My mother looked up, her voice breaking. You did this to us. I met her gaze. No. You did this to yourselves. I just stopped cleaning up after you. They didn't answer. The silence was heavy but not sad, just final. When I left, I passed the administrator's office and signed the last of the paperwork confirming their dependent status. It was an ordinary form. No emotion, no flair. Just boxes and ink. And with that, their lives were officially, legally no longer their own. As I walked into the parking lot, the air felt cleaner than I remembered. The sun was low, the world quiet. For the first time in my life, I didn't owe anyone anything. They once called me their maid. Now I was their guardian on paper. Their dependency was my closure. Justice had arrived. Slow, quiet, and signed in triplicate. The facility smelled like bleach and boiled vegetables. The sterile scent of control. The nurses smiled as I signed in, all soft voices and polite nods. They'll be happy to see you, one of them said, like I was visiting family, not the remnants of a dictatorship that used to be my parents. I followed her down a long hallway lined with beige walls and framed prints of flowers that had never lived. My footsteps echoed against the linoleum. Somewhere down the hall, a television played a game show too loudly, the applause track hollow and repetitive. When I reached their room, I paused. I hadn't seen them since the transfer. Just brief updates through the facility portal, notes from nurses. Adjusting slowly requires encouragement for hygiene, refuses group activities. I'd read every word. I'd memorized them. The door was half open. My father sat in a chair by the window staring at the parking lot. My mother was in bed, blanket tucked around her shoulders, her hair thinner now, her pride gone. When they saw me, their reactions were mirror images of their personalities. My mother burst into tears. My father scowled. "So," he said, his voice weaker than I remembered, "come to see what you've done?" I stepped inside and placed a small box of pastries on the table. "I brought you something sweet." My mother sniffled. "You didn't have to." "I know," I said, cutting her off gently. "But I wanted to." The silence between us stretched, full of everything we'd never said. Finally, my father spoke again. "They treat us like children here. Count our medicine, tell us when to sleep. We're prisoners." I met his gaze. "Welcome to my childhood." He flinched. Just slightly. But enough. My mother tried to smooth things over the way she always had. "You've made your point, Habibti. You've proven you can survive without us. Now fix this. Talk to them. We can go home." "There is no home," I said quietly. "Just a house where you kept your servant." She reached for my hand. Her skin was cool, paper thin. "You're still our daughter." I looked at her, at the fragility that once disguised cruelty. "I was your daughter when you needed a maid. When you needed a secretary. When you needed someone to clean your mess. You never wanted a daughter. You wanted labor." My father's voice cracked. "You think this makes you powerful? Letting strangers control us?" "No," I said. "It makes you powerless. There's a difference." He tried to stand, but his legs trembled. The nurse outside the door peeked in, concern flickering across her face. "Everything all right in here?" I smiled politely. "We're just talking." The nurse nodded and left. My father sank back down, defeated. My mother sobbed quietly, muttering prayers under her breath. I sat with them for 10 minutes more, talking about nothing. The weather, the food, the rules of the facility. They answered mechanically, as if following scripts someone else had written for them. When I finally stood to leave, my mother whispered, "We're still your family." I paused at the door. "Family isn't who raises you," I said. "It's who doesn't destroy you while pretending it's love." Neither of them spoke. As I walked down the hallway, one of the nurses called out, "They seem calmer after your visits." "I'm glad," I said with a small smile. "Sometimes closure looks like care." Outside, the afternoon light was soft and golden, the kind that used to make me feel trapped because I'd be inside cleaning. Now it just felt warm. Free. I started my car and looked back once. Through the window I could see them. Two silhouettes in matching robes, side by side, waiting for someone else to tell them when to eat, when to sleep, when to live. The state had done what I never could. It had turned them into what they made me. Dependent, obedient, powerless. And that was the truest justice of all. It was a gray Sunday when I got the call. The facility administrator's voice was calm, practiced. "Ms. Malik, your parents requested a family meeting. They said it's important." I hesitated. I hadn't been back in months. I could have said no. But part of me, cold, curious, unfinished, wanted to see what important meant to them now. When I arrived, the nurse at the front desk smiled. "They've been waiting all morning." Of course they had. Waiting was their new occupation. The common room was quiet, just the buzz of a fluorescent light and the faint smell of disinfectant. My parents sat together, side by side like obedient children. My father looked older, smaller, as if guilt had carved him hollow. My mother's hands twisted in her lap. "Layla," she began, her voice trembling, "we've been thinking. We want to go home." I sat across from them, folding my hands. "Home isn't an option anymore." "It's not fair," she whispered. "We're not sick." "No," I said. "You're dependent. There's a difference." My father's eyes burned with the last ember of his pride. "You did this to us." I met his gaze. I told the truth. You just never expected truth to have consequences. He leaned forward, his voice rising. "We gave you everything." The old line. The myth of generosity built on my labor. "You gave me chores, not choices," I said softly. "You gave me obedience, not love." My mother reached for me, desperate now. "We're family. You can undo this. You can tell them we're capable. I smiled, a small, tired smile. If you're capable, why did you need me to do it? Silence fell heavy like dust. They looked at me as if I were someone else entirely. Maybe I was. I pulled a folder from my bag, one I'd brought just for this moment. Inside were copies of every report, every signed consent form, every note they'd once dismissed. I placed it on the table. This is the record of what you built, I said. Years of dependency, denial, neglect. It's not punishment. It's documentation. My father stared at the folder like it might bite. And what happens to us now? You'll stay here, I said simply. You'll have food, care, safety. Everything you denied me. The state will do what I used to do, except it doesn't forget and it doesn't forgive. My mother began to cry, shaking her head. You're cruel. Maybe, I said. But I learned from you. I stood to leave. My father tried to call after me, his voice cracking. We're still your parents. I turned back once, my hand on the door. You were. But parents protect. You used. And I finally stopped being useful. I stepped into the hallway. The nurse smiled politely as I signed out, unaware of the gravity of what had just ended. Outside, the wind was sharp, the sky breaking open with faint sunlight. I took a deep breath, one that reached all the way to the years I'd lost scrubbing floors and swallowing pride. It didn't feel triumphant. It felt complete. Revenge hadn't been about rage anymore. It was about restoration, returning the imbalance they'd built, one careful act at a time, until justice became inevitable. As I walked toward my car, I thought of the first time my mother had called me the help. Now the state helped them. And I was free. I looked at my reflection in the car window. Older, steadier, unbroken. Justice, I whispered, should be slow, cruel, and deeply satisfying.